R. Kelly's back in court on trial yet again. This time he finds himself in a federal courtroom in Chicago. Let's talk about it. My name is Jamahl Kersey, and I'm the principal attorney at Kersey Law, a boutique criminal defense firm in San Diego, California. And in this video, we're talking about R. Kelly's federal trial in Chicago. It's just sad to think that a man who had such a huge impact on the music world is now in this situation. I mean, R. Kelly should be racking up all the Lifetime Achievement Awards, doing legacy tours, maybe even have a Vegas residency. You know, some of my friends went to go see Boyz II Men recently. That should be R. Kelly, but he is behind bars in a jail cell, was sentenced to 30 years in federal prison recently, and now on trial again, and it's just horrible. So in 2019, R. Kelly was indicted on charges of child pornography and conspiracy to obstruct justice. So basically, the U.S. Attorney's Office had put this matter in front of a grand jury. So the grand jury is tasked with determining whether there is probable cause, so reason to believe that, number one, a crime has been committed, and number two, that the person accused was the person who committed these crimes. The grand jury having returned an indictment means that they believe that there was probable cause to hold him to answer to trial. And so here we are. Opening statements were given yesterday. And so the opening statements are just a roadmap, if you will. It's the attorney's opportunity to instruct the jury or tell the jury what they believe that the evidence is going to show throughout the trial, because, you know, trial can be kind of hard to follow. It's not always going to be sequential in a timeline. Things are out of order and it can be difficult to follow. So it's very helpful to have the opening statement where they just sort of set forth what the evidence is ultimately going to show, and then in closing arguments, you tie it all together. Because this trial is going to be 4 weeks, so, you know, it's a lot of testimony. They're going to hear from quite a few witnesses, and again, it can be very difficult for a jury to follow along and not understand how particular testimony fits into the grand scheme of things. Assistant U.S. Attorney Jason Julian gave the opening statement for the prosecution. He said that the defendant, R. Kelly, had sex with multiple children. He said he made videotapes of him having sex with children, and says that he kept those videos close because if the world found out that he was having sex with children, he'd be in a lot of trouble and he would ruin his career. There were rumors that constantly over the years came out about R. Kelly and him having sex with minors and all these different type of things. And it seems that, you know, a lot of times it just kind of got swept under the rug or just accepted because he's a star, because he's an amazing talent. R. Kelly was on top of the world at a certain point in his career. And so the prosecutors, in order to kind of contrast the fame and the stardom, said that he had a dark side. They said he had a hidden world that was kept hidden behind the fame and the status. They said that his victims were little girls as young as 14 years old. And we're not talking about just a couple of times here. They're saying that he had sex with minors hundreds of times over the course of many years. So this trial also centers around allegations that he basically rigged the 2008 trial in Cook County. In that case, he was in Chicago, but it was a state court trial. So we're in federal court now, but basically the allegations are that he paid off his goddaughter. So the main witness in this case is going by the name Jane. So they're not using her real name, but she was his goddaughter, and he allegedly sexually assaulted her and actually recorded it on tape. And so the allegations are that he made efforts to basically cover up what he did. He also has two other individuals on trial with him. So that's his former business manager, Daryl McDavid, and Milton June Brown, who was an assistant. They're both being charged of basically scheming to buy back the tapes. So a lot of these tapes were just floating around, and they were making all the efforts that they could to buy back these tapes and make further efforts to basically cover up R. Kelly's wrongdoing. And so these allegations are just horrible. This idea that a grown man was having sex with these little girls, you know, is just atrocious. And again, none of these allegations are new. These are things that we heard about with rumors about R. Kelly for many years, that he was going to these high schools, having sex with these little girls. In terms of the tapes, you know, we heard about the tapes. They were rumored to be floating it about. You could go to any black barbershop in America and the R. Kelly infamous sex tapes were the talk. And so, you know, I personally never watched any of them or or had any interest. I just didn't have any interest in seeing a grown man having sex with little girls or peeing on them or anything that he had going on in those tapes. So obviously R. Kelly's on trial and the prosecutors have their allegations against him, but there's two sides to every story, and a person facing criminal charges, has the right to present a defense, and there's going to be a defense strategy that is ultimately rolled out in this case. Backing up a little bit before we even get to the trial, one of the things that is going to have happened is the prosecutor turns over to the defense the witness statements, the videos, photographs, any evidence that the prosecutor plans on putting in front of a jury if the case goes to trial. So long before we got to this trial, his lawyer, so Jennifer Bonjean is his lawyer. I'm not certain if he had other counsel on this case beforehand, because she came on later in the game in the New York case. So I believe she came in to file post-trial motions, and she's working on his appeal. But, it sounds like she's probably coming in sort of late on the game on this case too, but she would have had the opportunity to sit down with R. Kelly and say, hey, this is the evidence they have against you. What is your take on it? And that's where this gets interesting, because again, we're not talking about just 1, 2, 3, even 10 allegations of, sexual assault on a minor. The prosecutors are alleging that this happened hundreds of times. So it then becomes, it becomes difficult to say, if it's just a one-off, maybe, it's easier to say that someone's lying or someone's exaggerating or someone's using this for financial gain. But when you have allegations that this has happened hundreds of times over, it then becomes a lot more difficult to defend. I'll tell you, I had a sexual assault case, basically a sexual assault on a minor case years ago. And we were sitting in chambers. It was the prosecutor, myself, and the judge. We're sitting in the chambers, and the judge says, hey, that old quote, where there's smoke, there's fire. And again, he has every right, and he's exercising that right to proceed with trial and have a jury of his peers listen to the evidence and make the determination whether he's guilty or not. But this is a very difficult situation for R. Kelly. So R. Kelly's attorney basically is saying that, hey, the government's case hinges on the testimony of liars, extortionists, and people who engaged in the business of trafficking pornography. So it's basically, smearing or attacking the credibility of these individuals, basically to say that, hey, you can't trust a thing that these people say. And jurors are permitted to look at and assess and analyze the witnesses as they testify to determine, hey, if these guys seem like, slimy individuals who you can't trust because they're just not credible. And so as the defense plants the seed in their mind that these are people who are just not worthy of being trusted, that they're liars and exploiters and people out for financial gain, that sounds like it's going to be what the strategy is versus being able to present evidence that these things did not happen. So there are 5 alleged victims in this trial who are scheduled to testify, and this includes R. Kelly's former goddaughter, who's now 37 years old. Again, she's being referred to as Jane, and she's basically going to testify that she appeared in a sex tape with R. Kelly when she was only 13 or 14 years old, and R. Kelly was 31. And so this is going to be moving testimony if she's believed. If she comes off as credible and they believe her, this is going to be moving testimony. Again, we have a godfather-goddaughter relationship. There is an element of security and trust that's supposed to be there that R. Kelly allegedly exploited. The prosecutors allege that around the time when authorities started looking into these tapes, that R. Kelly pulled the move of sending Jane and her family on a month-long vacation. So got them out of there so they couldn't be available for any type of questioning at all. So he sends them on this trip, and then when they come back, he tells them to lie to the police about these tapes. And so one of the interesting dynamics is that Jane's father was actually a guitar player in R. Kelly's band. And so it sounds like there's some allegations that R. Kelly kind of used the financial situation to be able to manipulate him and this family, because it came to a point where their family was just really reliant and dependent on him for money. And so it made them ripe for exploitation. And so as far as Jane goes, R. Kelly's attorney will seek to attack her credibility. One of the issues is that, why is she now, after all these years, over 20 years later, she's now coming out and saying that, yes, it was me in these tapes, and yes, I was, 13 or 14 years old and R. Kelly was 31. Apparently, over the years, she has continuously denied. She denied it on social media. She's denied it to the police. She's denied it to prosecutors. She's denied it even under oath. So, Bonjean is going to say to her and expose on cross-examination, you've been saying that it wasn't you for all these years, and now you're saying that it is. And so the interesting thing is, yes, that will be an attack on her credibility. But one thing I talk about pretty often is that it is very much a challenge to dispute what a person says when you have a situation where you have two individuals and one says, X, Y, and Z happened, and they're adamant about it having happened. Even if there are some attacks on the credibility, the strongest evidence against somebody saying that X, Y, and Z happened is the other party saying that X, Y, and Z did not happen, or offering some sort of alternative explanation. But that is not going to happen in this case because R. Kelly's not going to take the stand. And so when you're in the process of picking a jury, especially if you know that your client's not going to take the stand, if your client is going to take the stand, then this part of jury selection is not quite as important. But when you know your client's not going to take the stand, then you got to make sure that you drive home the point that your client has the Fifth Amendment right to remain silent, and he's well within his right to exercise that right to remain silent, even at the trial. And the jury is not to draw any negative inferences from that. They're not to hold it against him because, the people's natural inclination is to say, hey, if I was accused of something, I would want to take the stand and I would want to clear my name. But no, you cannot hold that against a defendant. But again, we live in the real world, and oftentimes when somebody is accused of a crime, then jurors just naturally, they want to hear from the other side. They want to hear the other person's story. But the reality is, Miss Bonjean is not going to subject R. Kelly to cross-examination. I just believe, based on everything that's been out there up until this point, he would get absolutely eviscerated on cross-examination. We saw how he lost his ish in that Gayle King interview. Like, that just was bad. And so you would never want to put a guy like R. Kelly with these allegations, with this history on the stand and be subject to cross-examination. And the reality is, if he were to take the stand, he might not be in a position where he can sit up and say that that's not him on the tape, that that's not Jane on the tape, that he never had sex with her, that he never had sex with any little girls. He just may not be able to do that. And so, he's not going to take the stand, and, it's going to be rough for R. Kelly. There are 4 other alleged victims who will testify. They're now adults, and they'll say that when they were minors, R. Kelly sexually assaulted them. And going back to the infamous sex tapes, there's going to be portions of 3 of these videos actually shown to the jury. So they're actually going to see some of the footage from these videos. And again, these videos allegedly depict R. Kelly having sex with Jane, his former goddaughter. And so there's actually going to be reference to yet another tape, but the tape is not going to be played because there's allegations that that was done away with. And so again, there'll be reference to another tape that has R. Kelly engaged in sexual activity with minors. So it's just more evidence piled on against the famed singer. So it's not looking good for R. Kelly, but again, he enjoys the presumption of innocence. He is presumed innocent unless and until he is proved guilty. And so we'll just have to see how this thing plays out. Hey, if you got something out of this, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, make sure you turn on notifications so you never miss a new video when it drops. As always, I want to thank you so much for watching, and until next time, peace.